This first week is a panel discussion, and we're delighted to be joined by Gideon Feldman of Attitude is Everything, Amerah Saleh of Beatfreeks, Lee Bettles of Ego Performance, and Rachel Gildea of Blink Dance Theatre. The agenda for today is very much going to there's going to be about a 10-minute provocation from each of the panelists, and then we'll have a quick break after that, and then following that we will then open it up for an open discussion. So please do think up some lovely questions so that it's not just a one-man conversation with these lovely people. I'm going to start by handing it over to Gideon for Gideon's provocation.
Thank you very much. So my name's Gideon Feldman. I'm the head of programs with Attitude is Everything. I'm male in my mid-40s. At the moment, I still have decidedly lockdown floppish hair. Can't seem to do anything about it anymore. I'm sat in a very boring, echoey office, and I'm wearing a grey t-shirt. Attitude is Everything. We're a disability-led charity. We work within the live events and music industries, and we're always looking at ways in which we can be as accessible for everybody. We've been around for 20 years, training venues and festivals, working with funders, artists, professionals, and audiences. I'm amplifying the voices of deaf, disabled, neurodiverse, and people with health conditions and the communities that they live and work within. As an organization, we've got kind of one overarching ambition, which is to assist anywhere that live events and music happens be as accessible as it can be to deaf and disabled people. It's really important because every business, every community group, every location is different. And so there is no one cookie cutter provision that you can just put out there and restamp and restamp and restamp, and then everything will be wonderful. You need to be able to adapt, develop, engage to ensure that access is thought about, is implemented, and is practical. And that goes across, what sort of business you are, the undertakings and the expectations of what you might see at somewhere like the O2 or Glastonbury will be wildly different to what you might see at what is that fantastic grassroots venue at the end of your road. But the sentiment is the same across that. As an organisation, we're Arts Council funded. We're what's called a sector support national portfolio organisation. And that means we're here to assist organisations and businesses engage with access provision. We do that in loads of different ways. We mystery shop. So if any of you identify as being deaf or disabled, we've got at the moment about 750 mystery shoppers around the UK, always looking for new people to come and join us. People go to gigs on our behalf and report back, and we cover the cost of the tickets and reasonable travel costs. And we share that with the venues and the festivals that's happening. We also use that for research and campaigning. Which brings us on to the next bit, research and campaigning. We've got a whole load of free resources on our website, things such as our DIY access guide. So what can I do as someone who is just putting on my own events or working in a small scale venue? What's practical, what's realistic for no cost or no cost provision? We have a campaign called Access Starts Online. A while ago during our 2016 State of Access report, we identified that 30%, 33% of venues that had accessible toilets were not saying so on their websites. And it's like, as an organization, we've always been about see a hole, fill a hole, as in we're not here to point fingers and say you must do better. Although sometimes that's a bit of a lie. We'll happily say, come on, you can do better, but we'll also provide the resources to ensure that you can fill that access hole, and that's what Access Starts Online has done. Both of those pieces, DIY Guide and Access Starts Online, have now been translated into 16 different languages. I'm just waiting for the okay to release Urdu, Hindi, Bangladeshi, and Nepali, which is fantastic because we're doing a project in South Asia, and so they've been translated to languages for there. So that's another billion people who'll be able to access that information. Possibly not all of them will, but there's definitely an opportunity there. But it's also available in Spanish, German, Ukrainian, Russian, Arabic, simple Chinese, Brazilian, Portuguese, etc. So it's there. If you want to have at it, please do. During the lockdown, we also identified that there wasn't great access happening within streaming provision. And so again, in the same ilk as our DIY guide, we wrote a online live streaming guide, giving some ideas of what you could practically do at absolutely no cost, things that you can implement yourself, ideas and concepts of building access into your live streaming opportunity. And also obviously talked about professionalization of that for larger organizations. We've also, during the pandemic, started a new project we got funding for, which was great. And then we went into this situation, which was all about, it's called Beyond the Music, and it's about professionalization opportunities for people who are non-artist facing, but working within the live events and music industries. That's fantastic. There's a really great accessible employment guide that was released a few weeks ago, which you can again have a look at if you are looking at employing people. Looks at lots of different ways that you can ensure parity within your employment processes and practices. But that project's also looking at building networks of communication so people can keep talking, volunteering opportunities, interns, etc. And we just appointed our first intern, I believe yesterday, the interviews were on for that project. But the main area that I want to talk about today, oh, sorry, before I do that, we've got a charter best practice, so an access toolkit for building access into a venue or a festival's operation, and there's over 200 venues and festivals that have signed up to that. We also work as access consultants, had some really interesting new challenges. We were working on the G7 as the access consultant for that. We're really proud to be the access consultants for COP 2026, and you know, have some great stuff. We're just getting ready to go to Latitude as the access consultants for that particular festival, etc. So we do access consulting across lots of different mediums, and we deliver training, disability equality training, again across live events and music industry, so in lots of different ways. But I say, projects I wanted to talk about for this, and I've got a little notes to make sure that I hopefully stick to script, is called The Next Stage. So in 2019, we launched our Next Stage Artists initiative, aiming to make the music industry more accessible for artists with access requirements. As part of this, we released a survey. Out of the 96 artists who took part, 70 of them had withheld details of a health condition or impairment, as they were worried that doing so would cause problems and impact a relationship with a promoter, a venue, or a festival. The fact that artists felt this way shows that there is a real issue with inclusion in the industry. This data is supported by the Arts Councils for England's diversity report. While 19% of the UK workforce are deaf, disabled, neurodiverse, or people with health conditions, only 5% of the music industry workforce is. With 10% preferring not to say, and 47% as a not known. We should not assume that deaf and disabled people are discriminated against within the music industry, but the fact that so many of them have had these experiences and or feel unable to discuss that they are deaf or disabled shows a depressing trend. The survey results, alongside data from Arts Council England, shows that many deaf and disabled professionals within the music industry feel uncomfortable disclosing their impairments, and it's easy to see why. Ruth Patterson from the band Holy Moly and the Crackers calls being in a wheelchair a beautiful nightmare when it comes to performing. Not just for her, but for the band too. She says that most of the venues they play in are inaccessible for, she says that most of the venues they play are inaccessible or only accessible for the audiences. They've had to cancel shows because she cannot get onto the stage. She says that she has rarely seen any support for disabled musicians. She only knows of a handful of venues that have level access onto their stages. And she said, venues and promoters just do not think about disabled performers existing. Well, they do. And there would be a lot more of them if they had better opportunities to access and succeed this industry. It's also important to note that wheelchair users make up about 5% of the deaf and disabled community in this country. In contrast, it's estimated that 70% of people with a disability in the UK have a hidden, non-visible impairment. So just because a venue has stairs does not mean it is inaccessible to all deaf and disabled performers. So how can the industry become more inclusive? Disclosing impairments should not impact the opportunities deaf and disabled performers receive. Something as simple as asking someone's access requirements rather than assuming that you don't have to do anything would make a massive impact. That simple question within the rider or the information that you send out as a promoter, as in, do the artist or the artist team have any access requirements that we need to be aware of? It's a simple yes, no tick box. And if there's a yes, there's a follow-up. You'd be surprised how many artists have access requirements they have never felt comfortable disclosing. And once deaf and disabled artists begin seeing that the industry is welcoming, inclusive, and accessible, you're opening the doors to an array of talents that has never felt supported by their industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gideon. Just before we move on, I think if we switch the BSL interpretation to Gloria, if that's okay. Great. Thank you so much for that, Gideon. Let's go to Rachel from Blink Dance Theatre.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Gideon. That was really interesting. And yeah, it's great to hear about what you guys do. My name is Rachel. My sign name is this. I am a white woman in her 30s with messy red hair. And today I've got my kind of celestial starry hoops on and my starry black dress on, which has got moons and stars on it. And I have an ill baby at home, which is a bit of pain. She may well join me at some point, but as I said, as someone said on here, we need not to apologize for these things. And this is kind of case in point, really, for like making our world more accessible and inclusive. So I have got a keynote speech, which I'm going to share. So I'm going to try and share my screen now. Hope that's worked. Can people see that? Just, yeah, thumbs up. Brilliant. Okay, so yes, Blink Dance Theatre. I'm one of the co-directors of Blink Dance Theatre, and our provocation today is about why accessibility benefits everyone. So, why can I not move through? Oh, here we go. So this is us. From left to right on your screens, we are Rachel, that's me. We are, that's Francis, Vicky and Delson, and we are all co-directors of Blink Dance Theatre. We are a neurodiverse group of artists, and our neurodiverse makeup includes learning disabilities, learning difficulties, and mental health needs. And we started working together in 2013. So we use our differences as a starting point for creativity, and we believe in the artistic potential of everyone. We make performances, facilitate workshops in special educational needs schools and settings, and run trainings like this one about how we can make art more inclusive and accessible. And here is our main message, that accessibility benefits everyone. So I just wanted to ask, what comes to mind for people when they think about access or accessibility? And feel free to call out, write in the chat. It'd just be interesting to hear what comes to mind for people when they first think about it.
Guess I initially think of sort of BSL as like the first thing I think of. I think because it's the most obviously visual, maybe.
Yeah. Thank you.
Gideon's wrote community in the chat as well.
Okay, nice. Yeah, I can't seem to access the chat actually.
We've also, Hannah Barker's just put in accessibility, equalising the playing field.
Nice.
Just for me, I'm a wheelchair user, and for me, whenever I'm talking about accessibility, my first point of reference is my own experience. So I often think, can I get in here? Can somebody else like me get in here? If they can't, why not?
Yeah.
You know, that's my sort of take on it.
Yeah, that's often the first barrier, isn't it? Actually getting in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that personal experience is a really valid thing, because I think it's what you know, isn't it? It's the known unknowns and all of that. So when you've experienced it yourself, or you with friends or family who have particular needs, then that becomes really high in your thinking.
Yeah, because your mind is a memory, and your experience is a muscle, and so if you have experienced not being able to, I won't go on about it too much because I'll talk about it in my thing, but if your mind is remembering a particular thing where you've been denied, then it's going to highlight it, regardless of the intent of the organizer. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's any malice behind it, but it does mean that it is a shortcoming and it needs to be addressed.
So for me, a key thing from personal experiences with family and so on is toilets and information. That for me, information's really key.
Yeah.
So that people know in advance what will be provided or not provided, or enabled or supported. And I think the other thing is knowing when you get there who you might be able to talk to or get some help from is really useful.
Yeah.
And just Charles has also put in the chat, empowerment to be independent and be able to do things for myself.
Great, thank you everyone. That's such brilliant contributions. So I think a lot of the time when we talk about access in our sector, people that we talk to often think about a lot of the sort of physical things, ramps, ear defenders, hearing loops, content warnings, and there is also, we found a bit of a kind of box ticking exercise for some organisations and places we work with, and our bit of our mission is really to think of access as something creative, and to share how we can kind of reframe our ideas around access in all areas of making and watching performance. And we specialise in how we make the world and are accessible to, how we make it learning disabled friendly. So by removing barriers to art, we ensure that everyone, especially learning disabled artists, have the opportunity to be leaders in the arts. And I feel like I'm obviously preaching to the converted here, but this is important, obviously, because the theatre culture in the UK has mainly been a place reserved for the elite in society. And that by that, I mean people who are white, non-disabled, affluent, highly educated, and disabled people have been shut out of cultural and artistic spaces for hundreds of years. So whether you identify as disabled or not, access is about breaking down ableist systems and structures, and we believe that access is inherently disruptive and creative. So us all the 4 directors contributed and co-developed this talk together, and we've got 3 things to say. So these are our top 3 things to consider about accessibility. So number 1, ask and pay disabled artists. Number 2, watch your language. And number 3, access is creative. So number 1 is ask and pay disabled artists. So the access conversation should be disability led. It should be led by artists with lived experience of disability. Include disabled artists in your artistic planning from day 1. Embed the access in the work, the vision, the design, the timescale, the collaborators, the aesthetics, the script writing. Watch your language. Our understanding of the world is shaped by the language we use. Language can be a barrier to communication, and it's often the biggest barrier to making art accessible when working with artists and audiences with learning disabilities. Our sector, our theatre sector, has so much jargon. Keep your language clear and simple and say what you mean. Use feedback methods that don't involve the written or spoken word. For example, in our recent show, Girl Meets Boy, which these photos are taken from, we had a feedback station where on leaving the theatre, we printed out large photographs of each scene of our show, and we asked people to stick a sticker on their favourite scene. And they could add a comment if they wanted, but mostly it was really interesting to see different, see where the stickers fell on the different scenes. And so we get an idea, and particularly because this was an R&D sharing, we got an idea very quickly of which scenes were people's favourites. Use visuals. We also use easy read program notes, and non-verbal communication is very powerful. So number 3, access is creative. Think of access not as a luxury or as an add-on or an expense, but as something that will enrich your work, something which disrupts the norms and turns convention on its head. For us, access is simply a different or new way of communicating something. Someone we worked with recently said the access in our show was another creative voice in the work. And that is being described here. So this picture is of Delson and me, and we're sitting on gold stools, and Delson is using his iPad. Delson is one of our co-directors who uses his iPad to communicate every day, and he brought this into the work. So Delson was creating iPad poetry in our recent show Girl Meets Boy, and it took on its whole kind of, that element became its own character and its own voice in the work. And the next slide is called The Relaxed Revolution. And this is just, we feel it's important to mention that this is all coming from something that we call the Relaxed Revolution, which is being trailblazed by our friends at Tourette's Hero. So this is a picture of Jess Tom, who is one of our friends who we work very closely with, thinking about relaxed venues, relaxed performances, and basically making art less stuffy and relaxing the rules, essentially. So just to recap, what can we do differently? Consult disabled artists from the very start. Use alternative forms of communication and avoid overcomplicated language, and start thinking about the creative potential of access rather than it just being an add-on or an expense. Thank you. And these are our handles for getting in touch and staying in touch with us on social media, so Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to allow for the BSL switcheroo. So over to Erin and Philippa. Have you had enough time this time to pin? Great. Okie dokie. Next, we're going over to Lee. Over to you, Lee.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lee. I am a 47-year-old male with long hair, beard, and glasses, and I am wearing a green t-shirt with Terry Thomas on the front of it. I am a actor that works with a company called Ego Performance Company. I have been with them on and off for I think about 8 years or so, but I was in their very, very first performance right in the beginning in 2006, and I took a break and then came back. The purpose of Ego Performance Company is to make sure that theatre is accessible to everyone, that all barriers are removed, and I echo the sentiments that have been said already about the fact that theatre, by its very nature, it was conceived originally for the elite and the ableist situation, and Ego has set to destroy those labels by including everyone they possibly can to facilitate various disabilities. We have lots of different groups. I'm a member of a group called Big Ego, which is for what I would call old gits, who are the more older, discerning performer that will, that are of a certain age group. But we have children's groups, we have groups for learning disabled, learning disability, and we also do work which integrate all of those groups. We also have an orchestra as well, which regularly meets to do music. We're heavily involved in Coventry at the moment in the City of Culture. So we are rehearsing for stuff to do with that, which everybody is really excited about. And I am also a trustee. I currently work as a mental health advocate. So my job is to go into psychiatric wards and discuss with people their rights while they're under section. What I wanted to talk about today is just talking about access. I had a brief conversation with Paul a couple of weeks ago, and I was mentioning about kind of like an old concept, the social model and the medical model of disability. And actually, even though the medical model of disability is quite an old, stuffy situation, and it is not really relevant in some ways, it is actually relevant because it actually does point out actually how far we've come. Because what I've come to realize in my years of going around the room around the world is it's not actually my disability that stops me from doing things. It's society's reluctance or ability to be able to act, to be able to, for me to experience things. That has improved, but I remember as a sort of 15-year-old being shoved in the guards van in the dark, not being allowed a seat because there wasn't a disabled space on the train in the 80s. So I had to sit in the guards van. I still had to pay for a ticket, even though I wasn't allowed a seat. And now disabled spaces are quite commonplace. But what I'm sort of trying to sort of push through is the fact that there have been improvements. There are always things to improve on. Disabled toilets that are never wide enough. For wheelchairs, because wheelchairs unfortunately are getting bigger and bigger, and they're never wide enough. Because actually, I did a little bit of research on this. There is actually a bog standard toilet size, that's supposed to fit every single wheelchair, and that hasn't been changed for a long time. And I find actually, again, whenever I've done disability assessments, most of the assessments that have been done previously have been done by people who are not, who only have written knowledge of disability, who do not have disability themselves. So most of the errors that happen, whether it be a lift, the lift is there, but what's the point if the lift is there and the buttons are too high for somebody to reach? Or you want to go into a restaurant, there's a lovely ramp to get to the door, but the door opens the wrong way, so somebody in a wheelchair can't get in. These are all things that are really simple things to fix. Within our own theatre company, we've got ramped stage area. My colleague Kyle, who is also a trustee, but he's also a member of Ego Orchestra, he can go into the studio and work because there's ramped access. And it's all about, again, what some of the others have said about having that dialogue with a disabled artist, you know, to say, what do you need? But I do also have an air of sympathy, because I do think it's also about trying to break down the fear of asking in the first place. Because I think that's sometimes where the problem is. We're in a society actually where we're tangling ourselves up, or, you know, trying to say the right things without causing offense. And I think that there is lots of work needs to be done to encourage positive dialogue. And if somebody makes not a deliberate faux pas in language, but, you know, somebody is trying to learn, but what, you know, is coming from a good place, I think that it would really help in getting other venues to adapt their areas, their performance spaces, or their gig venues. I think the majority, you know, when there's they don't know where to begin, they don't know how to start that dialogue, and it's through people's works that I've been really impressed with what I've heard already, and I'm feeling really inspired by the fact that there are people out there like Ego as well, who are leading that change forward to make gently, in most cases, say, look, you know, we have a voice, we have a right to perform, we have something to offer the world, we are no longer invisible, we have something to say. And then the only thing, my only sort of caution is that we have to be careful about how we approach it. I'm often told off for this in my own private life. My mantra is educate, don't alienate. And sometimes we're so you know, have been in situations where, you know, because of the way somebody comes across, the damage can be, you know, can be catastrophic if it's not handled in the same way that we're handled in the sensitivity point of view. So thank you very much for listening to me. I'm sorry I've rambled on a bit, but I'm really enjoying it. And thanks very much for having me.
It's great to have you here. There was no rambling, do not worry. If we do another BSL switch. So we're back to Gloria, and Philippa, give me your thumbs up when we're ready. Fab. Amerah, over to you.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. It's been so interesting just listening to different provocations, and a lot of people thought that I've been writing down that I'll take away. But I want to start off. My name's Amerah. I'm 28. I'm wearing a mustard, very formal shirt today with a blue bow tie. I'm visibly hijabi, but I wear it to the back, and I'm wearing a hat. I don't know what kind of hat, but I'm wearing a hat. And I can't say the colour, actually. Fun fact, I can't say this colour, which is not blue. It's like, begins with a T. Anyway, I want to also preface this to saying I'm not wearing my Beatfreeks hat today. So this is coming from complete personal experience of how I've engaged as a layered human being, navigating and not only being a Muslim, but being neurodiverse and understanding the barriers that I had. But one of the things I want to start with is I didn't access any art space until I was an artist. And that is actually truth of a lot of my community who don't access the arts as a day out or as education. It's seen as too expensive. It's seen as a white person's thing to do. I'm going to be very honest. And it's not seen as something that we can just go to. And I'm going to talk about the reasons why, because I think access is amazing. I think that's the how. But as a neurodiverse person, I like to think of the why first. And the why is because we want to all be inclusive. So if we narrow down to the fact of what is our why and why do we want to be inclusive, we can get then the access is the how we do it, what we put in place. So a couple of things from my community in terms of barriers of engagement is looking at information distribution. And Gideon talked about kind of language and translating into different languages. But I also want to push that a little bit further of going, once you've translated it, what are they seeing when they then enter your space? Who are they speaking to? Do they look like them? Do they speak like them? Is the language then transferred across all of your space and your physical element? So understanding that in my community in particular, and as I said, I'm speaking from my personal experience, in my community, information distribution happens via WhatsApp. And there is no way they're going to pick up a flyer and engage in it in the same way that a broadcast via WhatsApp happens, and how fast it can turn around and how people trust it as well. There's a lot of issues there that I have personally around distribution of fake news and all of that. But it's the power that WhatsApp broadcast has, and the power that actually, Marianne from down the road has said this, so we should go there. It is so much more powerful than an advertisement on a platform that they don't use anyway. Another thing on top of that is understanding that when we're trying to engage with particularly younger Muslim communities, we tend to directly go to those younger Muslim communities, when actually within our culture, if you're at home, you are still under the parents' obligation. And that's a cultural tradition that we have. So when you're going directly to that young person, you're almost asking them of something that they need to get permission for. So why don't we go to the families and try and engage that way, so that then the young people can engage? So that's just the first thing that I wanted to talk about. Something else that I wanted to talk about is understanding that access is so much wider than the physical element, exactly what Rachel said. And actually, I went to type it in the chat as you were saying it, because it's all of the intangible things around it. It's the, are you serving alcohol, and understanding that excludes some communities. It's the, is your vegetarian broccoli, mac and cheese, and your actual non-vegetarian is quite lavish? Are you serving wine and then orange juice? And it's understanding those little things that make somebody feel like an other. It makes it feel like, oh, we thought about everybody and then we thought about you on the side. So those little things that are not, physically visible, but actually are welcoming. And this is a huge thing that actually I've personally, and I say this as a very privileged Muslim woman in the arts, because my story and where I come from, we don't end up in spaces like where I am today. We don't do things that I do today. And I say that from a very sad place, because that shouldn't be the case, but that actually is. And the reality of a lot of my peers, my friends, is very, very, very different. So when you're accessing spaces, a look from somebody can completely change how you engage in that space. And I say this as an ambiguously visible Muslim. And I joke that when people look at me, they don't know whether to be racist. They don't know whether to say something, because I look kind of funky and cool. So am I a Muslim, or am I one of the good ones? Which is a completely null kind of idea to have. But understanding your front of house and the first people that these communities are engaging with are going to make or break the experience. And if you have a great experience, you forget about it. If you had a bad experience, you never forget about it, ever. And that place becomes taunted. And then going back to that word of mouth and influence that WhatsApp has, if one has a bad experience, that then gets disseminated across a lot of people within that community. I want to give you an example of my family for the next kind of point that I want to raise. So my immediate family is about 19 of us. And I mean just my siblings, my parents, and their kids. There's 19 of us. So a day out is thinking about 19 people to do something. We have a multiple different kind of disabilities within a family, from physical to deaf to kind of Asperger's and autism. So a lot of different layers of thinking about what we will do as a family when we are thinking about it. But the one thing I do want to say is that culturally, we are very loud, very loud. And spaces in the arts are very Eurocentric. They're very Western, and there is a type of person that can enter it and a type of etiquette that you should have when you access these spaces. Now, if I understand these barriers and I want to break these barriers, would still not take 19 members of my family to an art gallery. I would still not. But that's not because exactly what Lee said, that's not because I'm embarrassed of them, but that's because society hasn't kept up with the times and understanding that people engage and interact very differently. I have 9 nieces and nephews, all under 10. If I let them loose in an art gallery, in a theatre show, they will be let loose. And that for me is beautiful in a way that they can then access it. But then I have to hold the element that everybody is staring at my family. Everybody is watching us as the other in that space, and that we're not keeping up with these unwritten rules that we've created for these spaces. So thinking about that, as well as thinking about the fact that, you know, my parents, for example, don't like eating out. My mum makes a huge pot of biryani, would like to sit in a park and serve it up to anyone that walks up to us. When we access these spaces, and when you're looking at kind of the vegetarian food and not all the food is not halal, you've then got a completely different element of a barrier. When my mum wouldn't have eaten there anyway, but I forced her to come, and then she's gone, because meat is so her day to day, and then she's gone, well, I have to eat this mac and cheese because nothing else is on the menu that I can eat. Kind of invites that element of the other, and invites that, although I completely feel welcomed, and that's because I've dominated my space and I've made sure that I've spoken out about my communities over the last decade that I've been doing this work. But it doesn't mean that it translates as easy, even to someone like my mum, who fully supports what I do, although doesn't exactly know what I do, but supports me nonetheless. So understanding that when we're creating spaces as well, inviting that element, and food is a big, 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 big part of culture. So inviting that element of bring food, you're welcome, like bring your families, let's be noisy, let's, you know, own this space. And I say this a lot about our public parks, because I see a lot of Twitter warriors complaining about very specific parks in Birmingham as a city. And they are the working class areas. They are predominantly Muslim areas, that the parks are probably the messiest. And we straight away can go to Twitter and we can say, oh, look, they don't look after the park. And it's like, well, the council or society has never made them feel like they own that. And if you're made to not feel like you own something, you're less likely to respect it. So if we start from a place of allowing our communities and allowing different people to own our spaces, then we invite respect ultimately, which invites more people, and it becomes a cycle. I do want to, so they're my couple of kind of very rambly, I'm so sorry, but I have so much to say and I can speak about this for days, but I do want to end this on, I am one Muslim. I am one person who has a layered multiple barriers of engagement in anything arts, but I am just one. And every single person, and what I get free tickets all the time to theatre, which I'm not boasting about, but I'm just saying I do get that. And, you know, my friends don't get anything or have never heard of half the shows that I go and see. So it's understanding that one person's experience is only one person's experience, and that the communities, particularly a community like the Muslim community, can be broken down into thousands of different types of barriers that they have to engage with art and culture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amerah. Lots of lovely stuff to think about there. What we're going to just do now is have just a quick 5-minute break where you can dash to the toilet and fill up your coffee cups. And then we'll come back and open it up for questions and thoughts. Great. So I guess just to start the conversation going, please do think up some lovely questions and either fire them in the chat or raise your hand, send a message to me, however you wish to do so. Oh, we have a baby now. It's exciting. I just wanted to start by picking up on something that I sort of felt came across in all of your talks in different ways, and that it sounds a very obvious thing, but getting people with lived experience of the access requirement, whatever that might be, within your process feels like a really important thing to do, whether that is through the mystery shopping sort of approach that you have to ensuring that those spaces are accessible, to some of the things you were just saying, Amerah, about alcohol excluding people, which is just something I, as a white Catholic man, just never think about, that actually being problematic for people. So I wondered if we could unpack that, I guess, a little bit more in regards to perhaps previous examples of processes you've been involved in, either as a person with that lived experience or as a person requiring a different lived experience, and what I guess that looks like in a creative process or in an event. I don't know if anybody wants to pick that up first.
I'll jump in because one of us has to. But yeah, no, totally. So, voices are incredibly important. As an organization, we've got the very first project we ever started was a mystery shopping project. Because if you're not able to gauge lived experience and explain that, then it's really difficult to engender meaningful change. A great example, which is from a few years ago, and a colleague of mine was talking about where I'm at a previous job, they had an access group. We've got an access group, and we talk about how we can engender access within our organization. And they've been meeting for 2 years, and they thought possibly it might be about time to talk to someone with a disability. And that idea of, so often you have people without trying to sound, like I'm dismissing anyone, but they have fantastic intentions, but really poor outcomes from those intentions. So if you're not going out and asking for, as an organization, we say we are pan impairment. We talk about all impairment groups. We're generalists, so we have a good understanding, but we are not specialists in any one particular impairment. So we're going to talk to businesses about how, what, why, where, when, but we need to be able to gather information. And so it's really important, that mystery shopping program, for everything that we do, and why I'm always banging on about trying to get more mystery shoppers to come and assist us. And it's not just that, the mystery shopping program, but it's also all of our other volunteering or engagement conversation pieces that we have. So the access hours groups that we've set up, the more people that we can get talking to us about that, the better. Things that came up, such as our Ticketing Without Barrier coalition, so working with the ticketing companies and large multi-venue organizations and multi-festival organizations, came from mystery shopping and activists talking about, look, why can't I just go online and buy a ticket? Why? How, come on, we've had online ticketing for 20 plus years now. why is my journey different from someone else's? This shouldn't be beyond setting up information. It's just a CRM at the end of the day. Sell me a ticket. Don't make me talk to you to sell me a ticket. All those sort of things lead on from just having chats, finding out what's going on, being informed so that you can make informed decisions. Yeah, anyway, waffling on.
Okay, thanks. Lee? Oh, you muted, Lee.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I totally agree with what you've just been talking about there, about focus groups. There could be a whole play written about focus groups. But what I'm sort of concerned about, I think there's a deeper thing that is rarely discussed, is why did it take 2 years for a focus group to speak to somebody with a disability? And I think that's quite telling. I think, the fact that the leader of that focus group wants to speak to somebody with a disability, and I don't believe for 1 minute that he will have thought about that, he or she would have thought about that just in the last meeting, or we've got to decide. That will have been playing on their mind for ages, probably right from the very inception of that group. But it's about, why did that not happen? Is that because the person who was leading that group had an unpleasant experience and didn't feel able to access it? Is it that? So that was my sort of first point. And the second thing, in relation to the ticketing, as a regular concert goer and a regular music lover, I get it. I get what you're saying, but I also understand the need for not that the journey is different, but I understand the need for a direction away, because with the particularly with disabled ticketing, most of the seats and things like that are in very, very nice positions. You've got good access to stage. You're able to see. Most of them are on raised platforms. So, there will be unscrupulous people who will try and get those that may not necessarily have an impairment. So I do think that the journey, is different, because I noticed that when I've booked for the NEC and the NIA, people are now asking questions about what type of disability you have. If we ask for it, are you able to bring proof? And I'm not offended by that, because that validates the fact that I need the ticket. And I think to say that actually that journey actually needs to go ahead the same as everybody else. Everybody else stampede for the ticket, as well as the person who's disabled, all phone in the same line. I think it would be ridiculous. And I think venues have to be applauded for making those suggestions and actually implementing those kind of questions sensitively in their blurb when you're booking in a venue.
Sorry, if I could just come back on that, because obviously I didn't explain. I was just using it as a throwaway line there rather than actually. But I'm not saying that you should just be able to go online and buy an access ticket. I'm saying the system's in place. Unfortunately, as someone with an impairment, we know there are times when we have to take extra steps to get the same service, and that is frustrating. But it is a fact of life. And when it comes to accessible ticketing, that's one of those areas. You don't want, say, Lee, as a wheelchair user, you don't want someone saying, great, it's a sellout show and I'm just going to get that ticket because I can, and then I'll rock up. I'm not a wheelchair user and I'll just expect someone to put a seat in it. Completely unfair.
Yeah, totally.
So having a way of getting yourself, so if we look at, you said the NEC, and they've had a great system at Ticket Factory, which is their ticketing, for a number of years now with the credibility card. Ticketmaster, again, have a really great system where you can register with them. They have your access requirements on file, and that will unlock the area of the ticketing. So you admittedly, the onus is on you, which is still a pain, but it's kind of like, I can't think of another way of doing it, and this is what I do for a job. So you've pre-registered, you've let them know what your access requirements are. That's all the information they need to know about you. They don't need to know about your impairment. They just need to know, what do we need to do as a business to make sure that you can engage with us the way that you want to engage with us. And that way you can go online and go, great, I'll just buy that access ticket because it's unlocked for me. I can get to that access to the area. I can gain access to that ticketing process. That's what I mean. But it's still frustrating that you have to set yourself up, go for all those hoops, etc. before that. And I wish I knew a better way of it.
Yeah, it is antiquated, but I always go back to it's always a danger if you hand the power, take the power away from yourself. I know my condition better than the NEC, and I have no way of knowing how my condition is being interpreted by the NEC. I know what I'm trying to say, but I can't control how that other person is interpreting it. So what I do have control over is when I ring up and book a ticket and they turn around and say to me, what access requirements do you need? If I have to do that every time I ring up, I think I see that as a necessary sacrifice to make sure that my experience is the best that it can be for somebody in my position.
Okay, if we could just switch over the BSL interpretation again, just for a second. Philippa, give me the thumbs up when you're... Fab. Lovely. Amerah, I don't know if you wanted to bring in what you've written a little bit above, because it's a really nice sort of quote to draw upon in the chat.
Yeah, I think just it made me think about something I heard years ago, and it was no one's hard to reach, you just haven't tried hard enough. And I think we use it so much as an excuse of, which is why it takes 2 years to run a focus group. Oh, we can't reach them. But actually, what resource have you put behind it, and what real outreach? I don't like outreach. I think it should be all about like in reach. How do you look at yourself in terms of how you go out, rather than, oh, hey, you come to my space. How about you go out and tell them what you want? But yeah, that conversation really made me think of that quote, and how actually we are so lazy as a sector in engaging, and we're very comfortable in where we're at, and we just get the baseline of money, and we just do this, and we just hit that, and we just do that, and just is not enough. Just is really not enough, and we should completely change. So yeah.
And I guess my question to that is, what can independent artist Paul O'Donnell, or somebody like Paul O'Donnell that makes theatre in his bedroom and is a solo artist that doesn't really usually make work with other people, but how do I guess ensure that the Muslim community is welcomed into my shows, and like there's not unforeseen barriers?
That's a really good question, and I'm not going to say that's not your responsibility, but I'm also going to say that is institutions' responsibility, and that actually arts organisations and where you are putting on your show, it is their responsibility. They're the ones. And I find it really horrible how a lot is put on solo artists. Oh, you want to bring in this community, go and engage them? No, actually, there should be a wider strategy across, which is why a lot of my work is around representation and leadership. Because I think there's a question in the chat around front of house staff, and my question back would be, actually, I think the advice should be to your senior leadership team, of asking them to invite your front of house staff to all of your trainings and conversations around how welcoming you want to be. Because it's very easy to kind of, and there is definitely an analogy here around class systems, but it's very easy to go to the ones that are working on the ground, like the artists, like the front of house, and go, you do it. And it's actually like, where is it? It has to systematically come from somewhere. So I think you do your bit as an artist, Paul, but I actually think the best thing you can do in that is raise those provocations with the organisations that you're working with.
And I mean, that's something as well, which, because through 2019, I tried to make my show more accessible to deaf and blind audiences. And what I think I was quite surprised with through that process was how much I was teaching the venues about access for those communities. And they were going, oh, this is fantastic having this show, because this is the first time we've managed to engage this community with our work. And I'm like, I shouldn't. I'm just sort of reciprocating what you're saying. Like, it shouldn't be down to touring artist Paul O'Donnell to invite the deaf audiences into the show. Particularly as for the deaf community, it was a hard sell because it's an almost entirely imagined Bon Jovi musical, and a lot of the deaf community was like, I don't like he's done nothing for the deaf community like Bon Jovi. So yeah, there was all sorts of complexities like that. Um, Philippa, I don't know if you want to. I see you've.
Yeah, just that thing about I agree that absolutely venues have that responsibility, but I think actually we all have that responsibility, and it's just that we have different bits of it, and what we understand to be our responsibility might change as we talk to the other bits of the ecology. And I think so Paul was using Talking Bird's difference engine to do that kind of work, and what we found with that is that an artist takes it to a venue and the venue goes, oh, that's good, and then they get in touch with us and then they share it with some of their other visiting artists or associated artists, and then they become ambassadors for it. And that has just, like, we haven't marketed the difference engine at all, and it's been used by probably 80-90 different companies over the last 3 years. We haven't done any big promotion. That has been people like Paul who have really embraced it, or a producer like Ruby Glaskin from Milk Presents Derby Theatre who take on a personal responsibility for it. And that's not an excuse for the venues not doing it, absolutely not. But I think I suppose I just want to really value the value of those people that are passionate about it and who take what they know and share it and are generous with it. But we need to make sure they're being paid more for it, frankly, which is a big wormhole we don't necessarily need to go down right now.
Yeah, and I think just on that note, Philippa, I would say I also agree with you, Amerah, that it is the job of the institutions. But I do think solo artists can do something. So when you're writing your funding application, put a line in there for an access advisor. Let that be someone, in our team, that's Delson. He's a non-verbal artist who is always saying to people, I need that in easy read. I need that, I need that so that I need the questions beforehand so I can answer on my iPad. So I would say put that into your funding applications, like you might pay a dramaturg or a lighting designer or a script writer, or it hasn't come in yet to you think about wanting to do a project and all the bits, but that needs to be in there. That needs to be in there with the access requirements. And so I think, and if I think of it something that's not your experience, you ask and you pay disabled artists to come and work on the project with you, and you pay them as consultants for their time and their expertise on it, really.
Can I just pick up on that, because it's made me think about something you were speaking about in your presentation, Rachel, of access being creative. And I think that was like one of the big surprises for me when I was making the show. I don't think I did it so well for sort of the captioning side of things, but particularly the audio description. The show's funnier with the audio description because he's another character in your head. And the blind audience members that came to experience the performance, they were saying like they were having laughs more than like secret laughs that the rest of the audience weren't getting, which they really loved and really valued. And I think maybe that's something for artists to, or for us to tell artists a bit more, is that it can be fun and you can be experimental with it. And just as you'd get a dramaturg on board, like think of access dramaturg or like you say, consultants with lived experience that can help find the comedy or the emotion in the audio. I'm just using audio description as an example, but whatever access requirement it is. I feel like that was actually really exciting for me as an artist, and I didn't know that before.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we found when we were embedding the audio description into our latest show, Girl Meets Boy. It's like it actually becomes like quite Brechtian, and you'll keep being reminded that you're watching this thing and this person looks like this and they're doing this, and it can be really creative, and it can it can just kind of bring a whole new perspective to the audiences watching the show. And I think we had a lot of fun working with our audio describer, because she really wanted to do that as well. So it was like a whole nother collaborator in the mix about how we can. And it was really, really funny. It added like an unexpected, very funny layer to things that weren't supposed to be funny necessarily. But I always remember, you know, that they were describing how I walked in, and I didn't realize I was even walking in like that. And it just becomes quite funny, like, and as this kind of like as a game to play, even in the first rehearsal or something, just to kind of throw that out there as a bit of a task. We've really enjoyed playing with it.
Fab. Does anybody else? Oh, we've got some hands up in the chat. Lee, is that your hand up from before, or is that a new hand?
It's a new hand.
Go ahead then.
Let me just take it down. So your Zoom is different to my Zoom, so I'm just okay. I just wanted to say, just in relation to the venues and about responsibility, I think that was a very important point that was brought up. And I'm sorry, I'm completely awful with names, but I think it was very important that the person brought up about, actually, it's not necessarily the artist's responsibility to take on the whole mantra. There is this thing that as a person with that we don't just take on the problems that we're trying to perform. We're trying to do these things. We're trying to get our own head together for what we're about to do on stage. We're also carrying the mantra for the whole disability movement on our shoulders, and our experience is important, and we're going to take away that experience, and we're carrying that. It's not all about that, and I actually think I totally agree with what the person said, that the venues need to take more of a lead in that. But I go back to my original point in one of my last questions, that why is that not happening? I still can't get my head around that. It's still something that needs to be explored. Why is it that theatres are not engaging? And I strongly believe it isn't laziness. I strongly believe, even though all this wonderful work is I still believe it's the good old-fashioned fear factor. Where do I begin? Where do I start? And the second thing I wanted to say is that my mantra in my own life is that I am a person who happens to be disabled, but I am the best ambassador that I can be. And it is my responsibility as an actor, as a trustee, as a partner, to be the best that I can be. So while I'm not expecting, when I go into a theatre, if I'm performing or what, I'm not expecting to take on the whole world of disability rights when I'm going into a venue. I still have an innate responsibility to be the best ambassador I can be for myself as a person who happens to be disabled. That's all I wanted to say.
Great, thanks. And Gideon?
I just had a point which is a while ago now, but just around responding to Rachel's call for about ensuring that there are budgets available. As a sector support organisation, it's one of the things that we're doing, and so part of this conversation is in terms of how can you assist, how can you grow that knowledge within venues, within organisations to do better, and instead of focusing on the artists, expecting the artist to bring in better, which is not fair. It's a collaborative approach, and it's community. But you know, we've been having conversations since we started our Next Stage projects. So not for long, just 2019. We've been developing training opportunities for funders and funding bodies. And that's now getting quite a lot of traction, which is really exciting, where we're going into these organizations, delivering disability equality training, and focusing on how funding processes and procedures can be looked at and ensured that access provision is thought of within those. And then also actively looking at, what is their paperwork? How are they developing that paperwork and pushing that paperwork out? How are they assessing that? And, there's been some fantastic changes off the back of that. Obviously, the majority of what we do is within the music industry. So, PRS Foundation now have a separate pool funding body or funding pot, where someone puts on their application they have access requirements, and it then doesn't come out of as it used to. As a disabled artist, you are now penalized because you're having to meet your own access requirements out of the pot of money that you're given to make music or write or whatever that might be. But there's now that separate pot which says, great, okay, you said you've got access requirements, let's have a look at what those are. Right, let's fund that from over here. And so you still have, the money that you should have to be creative with. And we're seeing more and more organizations engage and look at that and how they can ensure that that's happening across the board. And hopefully, we'll see it more. And the only other thing I wanted to say was having conversations, again, Rachel, with Jess Thom, conversation I had probably 3 or 4 years ago with her, talking about relaxed performances, and I was talking about my days as a tour manager and a production manager, and how I worked within disability arts and disability integrated and non-disabled companies, and how the relaxed performances were always just so much better, as in everybody was bouncing off of them, and it was just like, why is not? And talking to Jess about this, and she was like, yeah, relaxed performances is a great title, but it's theatre plus, and I've that's always, I've always stuck with theatre plus. Relaxed performances are their theatre, and you just get so much more out of it. There's more happening, there's more going on, and I love that term of theatre plus. Really like it as a concept. I think it says a lot, and it's easier to hook onto rather than relaxed performances. Right, we've got to think about keeping the lights on and think about people moving around and think about all those things. It's like, no, actually, no, it's just theatre plus. It's just, love that. Anyway, thank you.
I don't know if you wanted to come back on any of that, Rachel. Anything that was just said there, just you brought up, you don't have to at all. Before I move on to Philippa, and it goes potentially in a different direction.
Yeah, no, I hadn't heard that. I hadn't heard that Jess had called it Theatre Plus. That's new to me, so that's really interesting. And I remember having a chat with Jess, and she also said that actually it was cinema that started this, actually way back, I think maybe 80s and 90s, that started this kind of idea of a relaxed performance. But I agree, I think it benefits everyone. You can get up and move, you don't have to stay for the whole performance, you can have your baby on your lap, there's a chill out space, and it kind of completely turns it on its head, and going to the theatre becomes something where you don't just have, you don't have to essentially have to sit and be quiet and still for an hour, which for some people is not possible. And that's what it's been for so long. I think it reminds me a little bit of what you were saying, Amerah, about planning days out with your family. It's like, it should be possible for you all to go to a relaxed performance, because everything should be okay in that space, and welcome and celebrated even. And I think what I love about going to relaxed performances from the very outset is that you get in there and you can lie down, you can sit on a beanbag, you can stand up, you could be half in, half out, and so from the outset, it's like, how am I gonna watch this or be in this, or which feels good to me, and is kind of like, it's about belonging and welcoming as well, which I think we talked about a bit as well. It's about feeling welcome, feeling safe, feeling comfortable. Yeah, thank you.
Great, cheers. Philippa.
Just going to come back on that very quickly. It's interesting that even within relaxed performances, what's good for some people won't be good for some other people. So having the lights up is brilliant for some people and awful for other people. And I think it's, that's just really challenging. My colleague Derek Nisbet, who unfortunately he's working away at the moment, but he always talks about looking forward to the day when all performances are relaxed, except possibly for the odd uptight performances that get specially promoted. That's really interesting, because I know people who go to classical music, for example, who would find that really, really difficult to listen to the music while there's other noise going on. And at the same time people who need that. So I think there's always those challenges, and that brings me back to why I raised my hand, which was somebody was talking about the creative process and that thinking for us at Talking Birds, and it goes back to experience a long time ago when the company was faced with a kind of access challenge of a fantastic space upstairs, with a lift that didn't work, and how could we make that accessible? And it's before my time, but they found a way. They were challenged to find a way, and the local authority access officer basically threw the gauntlet down and said, you're an artist, if you can't work it out, who can? And I think that's a useful thing to remember, and that's informed the company's way of thinking ever since, which is, if there's an access challenge, then finding the solution is what makes your show better. And it makes the show better not only for that particular group of people who have that particular access challenge, but actually it tends to make it a better show for everybody, a richer, multi-sensory show. But it's not easy, and Erin will know this from when we were working on Capsule, and Erin was there as a BSL interpreter, performer, deviser, and trying to marry what we were doing with that particular show with captioning and audio description and BSL and the complexity of how the show worked. We wanted to make every show BSL interpreted, and in the end we just couldn't do it in the way that it worked, and we ended up having scheduled BSL interpreted shows instead. So there were some particular, the nature of that show made it more challenging. So I think we're trying to solve lots and lots of things at once, and sometimes you have to recognize that you can't do all of that, but what can you do in some of the performances perhaps to meet some of the needs? Maybe you can't do it all the time. I think it's really challenging because we want to make all our shows accessible to everybody every time, but I don't know that every single show can be accessible to all people every time.
And I guess could I open that up to the panel a little bit, like in just the four of your provocations, there's a lot of access needs and requirements that I have to try and tackle. How would you suggest I begin on that journey? I guess how do independent artists, small organisations start to make their work accessible? Gideon?
Comes back to conversations. Admittedly, so there are a bunch of amazing resources out there, but it's all, you only know what's there when you find what's there. So that's one of the things. So as part of, I bang on about the guides that Attitude is Everything make, and the guidance and the resources. We're always trying to make things that will be of value that you can just go and get and have and play. It's only 2-3 years that I've known about the Difference Engine, and having that understanding of what the Difference Engine can do and how that can be operated, and what an incredible resource that is for engaging in access provision. But it's having, it all starts off with having an open conversation with the venue and the community and your fellow company members, and then realistically working out the program of what can we do, how can we put this project in place from my perspective. But then I'm a production management background, working in an organization which is here to support businesses do what businesses do, which is it might be a little bit more naive than people who are actually physically at the coalface making the art.
Yeah, and I'd say I think Lee talked about this, and how difficult it is for us, especially as people who are British, possibly, but it's asking, like, what do you need to make the work? And then when anyone else comes into the room who's going to help you, ask them, what do you need? And starting the day like that, we start every rehearsal with a question, what do we need? And it might be, today I need to leave early. Today I need to spend the whole lunch break lying on the floor. Today I need you to tell me that I'm doing really well. Today I need you to say things really clearly. And from there, you just start. It's just about asking people what they need, and start by asking yourself, what do you need to make the work? And then for everyone that comes into the session, it's about asking, what do you need today? And I think also knowing that it will change each day. You know, every day I need this, some days I'll need this. And then once you've got that, I feel like from there, you can start getting into the work and making sure that everyone's needs are being thought about, really.
Thanks. And Lee?
Yeah, just to add to that, I couldn't agree more. The biggest problem, and I'm sorry I'm sounding like a broken record, but the biggest problem is, I think it was Martin Luther King that said the most powerful thing that you can do is take the first step. You don't need to know the whole staircase. And I think the problem is, it's taken that first step, you know. So I actually saw your Bon Jovi show, Paul, and I thought it was fab. For me, at the end of the day, it's about not being afraid to have that dialogue, start that dialogue. All that's going to happen, it's a dialogue. You're not going to, the problem is that you're people twist themselves in knots, thinking, hey, what about if I say this? What about if I say this? In a dialogue, it is exactly that. And the great thing about a dialogue, you can make mistakes, you can trip over yourself, get tongue-tied, you can do all of that stuff. But out of all of that comes the most amazing realization about access and about what you can do, and about, talking to the deaf community to make sure that everybody knows that in the deaf community, Bon Jovi is a rock god. It could be, it could be anything like that. But the first thing is to get over yourself first, which is the biggest disability of all. And actually then say, how can I do this? This is what I want to do. How can I do this? What can I do? And focus groups, not focus groups, but groups like this, are going to help that. But just having that dialogue and not being afraid to trip over yourself and make mistakes and say the wrong things and say the wrong pronoun. It's about making that effort. And trust me, when you're out there making that effort, people are going to lap it up, and your performance as a whole will improve, because your knowledge will improve, but also your confidence will improve in the way that you approach venues, because you'll become more confident. You won't feel so nervous and so apprehensive about having that initial discussion. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I mean, Amerah, I've seen listening in your in the chat, which I want to come on to as well. But going back to something you had written earlier, you sort of said that artists often use fear as an excuse not to do it, and I guess that felt like it was preventing me at the beginning, and it was kind of terrifying at the beginning. But I think it is sort of that thing of taking that first step and going, okay, well, I'm trying here. And for all of the sort of focus groups we had in to see the show, it was very much with the preface. I mean, they got free tickets because we were using them for like feedback as well as so that they were getting something out of it as well. But yeah, I guess just bringing in that earlier point about fear, really good to hear your thoughts on that. And then also, as you said, listening.
It's a real emotion. It's a real emotion, and it can't be ignored. It has to be addressed, and there has to be some sort of inward thinking about why that fear exists. And I think if we can dispel that, the dialogue between the arts and artists, people with disabilities, it will only serve to increase the quality and the clarity of that dialogue if the fear can be removed. For somebody like yourself, for example, who's trying to do a show to try and make the show as accessible as possible, if that fear wasn't there, you'd probably have been able to take it another notch. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, Amerah, do you want to come in on that at all?
Yeah, I think the reason I say that is because I think the fear is coming from the wrong place. What you fear is, as an artist, you fear failure. And as an organisation, you feel looking bad to the Arts Council or whoever's funding you. That's where the fear comes from. The fear doesn't come from the people you're trying to engage, and that you'll do it because it is about taking that risk and that when I said listening, if you start from a place of listening, you can start from a place of, okay, this is what you need and this is what you want from me in this space. So this is how I can do it, rather than masking it as like, yeah, we're scared. What we're scared of is change. What we're scared of is this Eurocentric traditional way that we view arts and culture, and that our traditions, whatever that means, will go and we won't have that. And theatre will become a messy place where all performances are too relaxed and there's no etiquette that has. That's what we're scared of. We're not scared of the people we're trying to engage. And that's why I think I really stand by the point that we need to acknowledge where that fear comes from. Is that fear coming from internally? How am I going to look to my funder? How am I going to look to the rest of the artists? Or whether that's actually wider.
I guess all I'd add to that is I feared all the way through it, of doing it really badly for that audience as well. Like it was, yes, a very internal fear, but on behalf of the people that I was trying to make it accessible for. And the sort of alleviation of that was that they were all getting free tickets. So the worst thing they've lost is like a painful hour at the theatre. Like they haven't lost any finances because of it. But that fear, and I think sort of Lee's picking up on this a little bit, like I didn't want to say the wrong things, or I didn't want to do the wrong things, and particularly like with the deaf community, there's such complexity of language around that particular requirement, and different people within that community wanting very different things. And I felt like I've learned a bit of that as we've gone through, but it was a terrifying journey to get to where I am now, because I was scared of getting it wrong. And I had a creative team around me who knew a lot more than me as well. So I think the fear is quite laced on lots of different levels.
And I think from my place, I always go like, as long as we lay out, like when I make work, we lay out permission and all the permissions that we can have within this, like permission that I will say some things that are wrong because I don't know. And once we lay out that permission, and then the permission to have that honest conversation, if somebody says something, then you're able to learn and open that dialogue and make the work. But yeah, like, I mean, it sounds like the work that you did had that permission and you were listening and you were engaging with them. That's as much as you can do as a human being. Like you can start from a place of listening and wanting to do the best thing. And I think this idea that we don't mess up it's why I have very opinions around cancel culture and all of that, because I think the idea of that we are human beings and we say wrong things sometimes, and it's intention. And if you're able to have a dialogue of going, oh, this is how that made me feel, rather than attacking the person, of saying, you said this is who you are because you said that, we're able to have that conversation. And I'm a big believer that every conversation can change the world.
I've just seen Lee's comment of you're being too hard on yourself, Paul. Thanks. This was the group counselling that I needed today. So thanks for taking part in my group counselling.
At least you're making the effort. And I think you need to, I think the reason, 25 years ago, 30 years, this group wouldn't have even been able to come together. It would not have even happened. So the fact that every single person on this Zoom is in one way or another trying to make the world a better place for those that have various disabilities, impairments, is amazing. And the fact that it sounds like you're almost beating yourself up to an absolute pulp about things that you may have got wrong. And my only worry about that, Paul, is the fact that you may beat yourself up to such a degree that actually you're not giving yourself time to celebrate your actual achievement of actually trying to make your work accessible to as many people as possible. There are going to be groups that totally won't get your work. There will be people that hated Bon Jovi. There'll be loads of people that you will have missed. But the fact is, if somebody comes out and says to you, I didn't really enjoy that, and this is why I didn't enjoy it, because it wasn't loud enough, or because I couldn't see, it could be anything. I saw your show, so I know what it was about. I know it was very well done. But I just think you need to pat yourself on the back and say, well done for actually trying to be as inclusive as possible, because trust me, there are bigger artists out there than you that should know better and don't.
Thank you very much, Lee. I feel like you should follow me around and give me positive.
No problem. I'm free on Saturdays and Sundays. I work Monday to Friday.
Great. But I guess I'm not raising that, I guess, for my own purposes, but I think it's coming back to this thing that keeps popping up in this, is like, it's making that start and having that confidence to do that thing, whatever that thing is, and I guess fighting through that fear that you've got in your head that you're going to screw it up, because I think that is what is holding a lot of people back. I think Philippa wrote about the fear, the cost, the knowledge, and something else earlier on, which those were certainly the things that felt like they were prohibiting me from doing it before 2019. And it was only when I sort of worked with Philippa in Arena Theatre that I went, oh, actually.
But Paul, I think what it was there is what I said, what actually matters is your priorities. And it's when it became a priority for you, you made it happen, isn't it? And it's about, you make it a priority. And so you put it into your funding application and you go, I am going to put in an extra £5,000, £10,000 into a funding bid, even though that takes me over a limit. And I feel that might mean I don't get the funding. But actually, increasingly, Arts Council, as major funder for a lot of these projects, want people to put that in. And I think that's a really important message to tell people, that it's a priority for a lot of the funders. And if you make it your priority and you prioritize that in your time of your schedule of how you're putting your show together, you're actually leaving enough time to do it. And if you're prioritizing it in your budget, you've made you've like stepped over that line in the sand in a way, haven't you? I think all those things about capacity and resources and knowledge, they're all valid things and all things to acknowledge, and all of those things affect what we do. But if you make it a priority, and I think somebody was like, where do you start? Just start somewhere. Start somewhere on something, because then that's what you did and you got really confident, and now you're like trailblazing this in Coventry. And the other thing that somebody said, we're all learning all the time, we are, and if we keep talking to each other and telling each other what we've learned, I'm so excited that we're having these conversations in Coventry now, really quite a lot. So there is an Attitudes and Access Forum and obviously all of this that's happening. But where it gets really exciting is where, I'm always excited if I talk to someone who wants to use the difference engine, who's never done anything before, and I end up having a really long conversation about it, and then they tell me about something they've done, or some other company that's done something really interesting, and so even if you've done one aspect of access quite a lot, you go on learning, but only if you talk to people about it. If we don't talk about it, we won't make any progress. So I think just go and talk to someone who's done it, ask somebody. But the art sector, and in Coventry, I think this is really, really true. It's very generous. People are generous to talk about things. Don't abuse that. Put some money in your budget to pay some people with those access needs to talk about it, but just talk about it.
Fab. We're coming towards sort of the end of the session. I think just to close it off, if each of the panelists could give one sort of immediate action that we could go away and act upon almost straight away, what would that be, I guess? Putting you on the spot a little bit, I know. Thinking time.
I'll jump in again first then. Find the resources. So, there's lots of guidance out there. I will happily put the hand up of Attitude is Everything's website. There's a nice big resource tab on the top of our website. We don't hide it. You can go and get it. So there's lots of things that you can read. So at least you have an understanding of what is achievable and manageable, and then you can follow through from there. So, starting off with self-review, so that hopefully you're able to engage and hold conversations in a way that's going to move you forward without as many stumbling blocks.
And if there was one piece of one resource on the website that you particularly say go to,
there really isn't. But from an individual artist wanting to do something themselves point of view, it's the DIY guide. It's a fantastic piece, even though I say it myself. I didn't write it. That was Jacob, and it was a collective piece of development work. It's fantastic. It's great. If you're a venue or working, working within a venue or a festival, it's the Charter of Best Practice, which is more of an embedded project tool. And takes time and resources to actually put in place.
I'm happy to go next. I guess a tangible action that everyone can take is share this recording with one person that they feel like could benefit from learning. That's the best we can do.
Spread the love around. Great, Rachel.
Yeah, I'm really I love this thing about just start doing something. Just go for it. And I think my Blink's take home point is just that access is creative and have fun with it. And next time you're in a rehearsal studio, or maybe even just making your lunch, just say what you're doing, and or get someone else to say what you're doing. It's really funny, and it's a great way of then the audio description being embedded into the work. So just play that game at home with whoever you live with, or next time you're in a rehearsal studio. It's and just see where it goes.
It's a fun game for later. I'll be playing that around my flat on my own. And Lee.
First of all, I just want to say I've really enjoyed today's panel. It's been amazing. I've learned so much, and I shall take a lot away from this, and I shall probably revisit the recording because I'm trying to absorb it all, and my brain can't fit it all in. But what I would say, the one thing that I would say is don't be afraid to ask questions, but ask in the way of be the best ambassador that you can be for yourself, and allow the venue to see you as you, and asking those questions. And actually, I think that will then encourage them to open up and not be so scared. And actually, I've mentioned the fear for a lot, but it will disperse, and it comes from taking that first initial positive step, like that brilliant question: what do you need? What do you need? What do I need? And it's just a simple dialogue, but I can tell you, I can feel it already. That's one statement is just going to cut through a whole forest of stuff, and actually it will just encourage a really positive dialogue. And I think even something as simple as that sentence, "What do you need?" is literally going to just change the way that the dialogue takes place. But just ask the questions, from a good place, and be the best ambassador you can be for yourself.
Fabulous. A lovely way to round off a really interesting session. I know I've learned lots from the four of you, so thank you so much to Gideon, Rachel, Amerah, and Lee. Round of applause. It's been hugely inspiring, and I hope lots of people come back to watch these videos. So what we'll also make sure we do on YouTube is we'll put some links in the box below where we can link to things like the DIY guide and other things like that. So if you are watching this on +1 via YouTube, then do have a look in the box below. We'll also put the feedback forms there. So we'd really love for you to feedback on today's session. Also, just a huge thank you to both Gloria and Erin for stepping in at quite the last minute to be our BSL interpreters. They've both been incredible, so round of applause for them. And thank you to those of you who fought through the ticketing system to make it today to the live event. Sorry there was that at the beginning. We shall make sure that's resurrected for the next week. Talking of which, the next week is, so next week's session, next Friday, same time, it's housebound audiences. So it very much taking on from our experience of lockdowns over the past year and a half, and how we can continue to keep that access going. We'll be talking to Zoe Partington, who will be the keynote speaker, and local theatre company Radical Body will be coming to share some of the work they've been doing with Belgrade. So hope you can make that. That's Friday the 9th at 11:30 to 1:30, and we will put the link in the YouTube box also for that. Thank you very much. Thanks to everybody for coming. It's been great.
Thank you.
It's